Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bible study. We're going to continue on in this awesome sermon of Jesus. He's talking to his disciples. We talked in the last video about some of these blessings and woes, okay? So we went through two of the blessings and two of the woes, but they were all very related in the last video. It was kind of like, if you're blessed, if you're poor, if you're hungry, if you weep, and none of those things sound good, but if you do those things now, but you have the opposite to expect in heaven, we talked about a lot of what that means. The flip side is if woe to you, like a proclamation of judgment, basically, if right now you're rich and you're well-fed and full and you laugh, because in the future it's going to be the opposite for you, those things aren't just like automatic, I laughed today. Does that mean I'm going to hell? Don't take it quite that literally, but, I encourage you to go watch the last video where I kind of unpacked it, and hopefully that will be helpful. But today we're going to talk about the next couple items, and they're on a bit of a different theme, because those other ones were kind of like your livelihood, your condition of life, what you have, what you don't have, what you do, what you don't do. In the next pairing of blessing and woe that we'll focus on in this video, it's more about how people treat you, how people look at you, perceive you, and act towards you. And that's, I feel like, a kind of a different idea. So let's look at verse 22 and 23, and then that'll be the blessing part, and then we'll flip over to the woe part, which is like the other partner verse that goes down on verse 26. So 22 and 23, and then we'll jump over to 26. Blessed are you when men hate you, and ostracize you, and insult you, and scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way their fathers used to treat the prophets. That's the blessing. The woe, or the judgment thing, the bad news for you thing, is verse 26. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets in the same way. All right. Let's talk about this for a minute. So in verse 22 and 23, okay, is it necessarily a good thing for people to hate you and ostracize you, insult you, and scorn you? No, nobody seems to really want that to happen, and you shouldn't make it your aim to go be a jerk and get people to hate you. What he's saying is if you're a follower of Christ and you're living and patterning your life after him, and it disturbs other people to the point where they really don't like who you are and what you're all about because they're offended by Jesus, the claims of Jesus, the life of Jesus. If you basically get persecuted because you're following him, well, then you're blessed, And even though it's not fun, it doesn't feel like a blessing when people insult you and scorn your name like it's evil, like make your name a byword or something, to basically hate your guts. That doesn't seem like a blessing. But Jesus is, in all of these blessings and woes, trying to get people to think beyond the here and now. So he's trying to get you to think that, hey, you'll be glad in that day, the day when the kingdom fully comes and when we're in heaven, basically. He says, because your reward will be great in heaven. I mean, he's saying that you get rewarded for that level of faithfulness. When people... It's one thing to say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I love Jesus, and I want to live by what he teaches. Well, that's fine until people hate you for it, But if you still endure, if you stick to your guns and say no, or that's kind of a dumb phrase, but if you stand on your principles that no, I believe in Jesus and I'm living for him and what he says goes, I don't care what anyone else thinks. Well, they might lock you in prison or beat you up or call you names or whatever, but guess what? According to Jesus, that level of faithfulness gets rewarded. And in heaven, you're going to be very blessed and very excited and very joyful. So joyful you'll be leaping, right? You're just going to be like, yes, I did it. It was worth it. It was all worth it. It's going to be exciting for you. So that's kind of what he's encouraging you to do, is like, don't sweat it. Live and suffer the things that may come right now in this life, and have a long view towards eternity. It's going to pay off in the end. He also does toss in here that the way that getting treated that way isn't anything new, because the prophets of old, in the Old Covenant and the Old Testament, you hear lots of different stories of prophets that God sent to his people, and the people just wanted their own way. They didn't want to hear what the prophet from God had to say, to challenge them, to hold a mirror up in front of their face to see how ugly they had become and how wretched their lives had become. They didn't want to reform their ways, and so they just wanted to make these prophets so miserable that they would give up, or in some cases they would just kill the prophets, because they didn't want to hear what God had to say. That has always gone on, and it will always continue to go on, and that's all Jesus is trying to say. Is he's like, look, guys, you're no exception. If it happened to the prophets, it's going to happen to you. This is just the way it goes. But those prophets who died being faithful to what God called them to back in those days, their reward is going to be much the same as your reward. If you stick it out, be faithful like they were, hey, you and them, you're all the same in this life, but you're also going to be equally blessed in the next life. So just keep that in mind. It also does couple well with his next point when he gets to the woe. So if we jump over to verse 26, he says, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets in the same way." So there's two different sides going on. There's prophets and there's false prophets. And the prophets who are speaking the true words of God are being hated because no one wants to hear what God has to say. No one wants to be convicted of sin. No one wants to change. But the false prophets come along, and the false prophets are much more easily accepted. It says men speak well of them. They're like, oh, that's a good prophet. He's nice. I like him. His nice family. Nice this, nice that. They're cool. They're good. Leave them alone. Because those guys don't say anything challenging, and in fact, they're speaking lies. They're leading people on to believe things that aren't true, that are actually just going to hurt them and cause greater suffering. They're extremely irresponsible people, but the point here is that the people want those soothing messages, those soothing words that have no bite, that have no teeth, that have no power, no punch. They don't want to hear the words of God. They want to hear the soothing words of men. And so don't be surprised. In the past, the people who want an excuse to remain in their sin are going to lift up the false prophets, spreading the false message and living a false, life for God, a false pretense, of a life that honors God. It's all a show. It's all for selfish gain. And then there's going to be people who are doing the real thing but are going to get pushed down. And that's just, again, how it's always been, how it will probably continue. I mean, how it definitely will continue. That's what Jesus is basically saying. And it's not that, it's not like, woe to you when people speak well of you. The Bible talks in other places about how we want to live lives that are honorable, that we want in a general sense to gain the approval of other people. We want to live a life of good conduct so that nobody speaks evil against us. But what Jesus is warning against here is when all men speak well of you. So it's not like just, like you want good people to think well of you and speak well of you, but when there's not a single person who has anything negative to say about you, it actually may mean that you're on the wrong side. Because if you really stick up for Jesus, if you really stick up for the truth, if you really stand on this word and you don't move and you don't soften it and you don't slip out of it and you don't let things off, you don't turn a blind eye to things, if you really hold the line for truth, then you will make enemies. You know, like people will not like that, and they will not like you, and it will bring upon you some sort of persecution. But again, this is all to be expected, and if you can endure, then there are rewards that the Lord has for you. Why rewards? He's just a really nice Lord, you guys. Like, Jesus is a great master to serve. You know, he is Lord of all, and he knows how to give good gifts to his servants, and the Father knows how to give good gifts to his children. And Jesus is awesome, you guys. Okay, so basically, I think that's a good place to end for today. A couple of those things. So just to recap, you know, stand for truth. No matter what it costs, it will be worth it. And don't be surprised if some people want to shut you up or be mean to you. Just deal with it. In fact, if I can share a quick little story, well, maybe I'll save the story for another time. It may be better even for the next video. I don't know. But in the next video, we're going to follow up on verse 27. We'll jump into that. Where it kind of talks about, Jesus talks about loving your enemies, doing good to those who hate you, and so forth. That really fits right in with this last like little woe, because when people start, you know, it fits with the blessing and the woe. And the blessing part, you know, he says, he talks about when people are ostracizing you and hating you and all that. Verse 27, 28, 29, things like that start to talk about how do you actually react? How do you respond when people start treating you like you're the enemy? Then what's your response supposed to look like? Jesus has awesome answers for that, and that's the stuff we'll get into on the next one. So I hope this has been encouraging. Love you guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. See ya.